How did we start last week episodes, Jake?
I made a character.
We built a you built your character.
Drunk pirate monk guy, yeah.
Drunken way of the drunken master pirate. That was fun. I feel like I should have asked you because you were building the character and I was kind of the role of DM. I feel like I should have asked you when you're DMing and people come to you with characters. What gets you excited? Like, do you like when someone comes to you with like something more complex or like a really fleshed out idea or vice versa, something simple, or what gets you going as a DM?
I always fuck with the simple ones. I think it's because when you give me a super complex character, I'm like, yeah, let's make this even more complicated. So I get so into it. Like, oh, I get so into it. Like that one Circle of Stars druid character, and then I made like celestial maps for him. He already had a somewhat extensive backstory, and then I made it even fucking longer. So I think Whereas recently I've been preferring like your Dungeon World character that you did not too long ago. The premise was simple. He's a gunslinger, good guy who's not the brightest, and it was fun. And I think he was the best character in that one. And
we still found some ways for him to change and have an arc. He adopted some new things, and
it was easier on me to not have to like really stress about you having a backstory, and then also you're able to kind of be more freeform with it.
Yeah, and in that same campaign, you DM'd for a player who made a character that's like, he has amnesia. So
he had literally zero backstory.
Yeah, he's like, his memory only goes back like a month, so like he just gave you free reign to just basically create what happened to his character beforehand. And I know that we didn't get to all of it, but
I mean, we got to pretty much. Well, there was
because you had the judges.
I had the judges. That was going to be like a cool fight that you guys were going to do, but we didn't get to that part. But you guys like figured out his backstory.
But you got to you basically got to just write it. You just like created what he used to be, and like that seems
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it was
I think
interesting.
that could be fun.
I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I could do that as a player.
Yeah, like totally give up free reign.
Yeah. I mean, fuck. I don't know. I'm pretty like fast and loose with shit, so
yeah.
I probably could. I probably could be like, all right, Keegan, this guy doesn't know shit. I'm just gonna play him how I play him, and
I don't often feel myself finding the need to like come up with a super complicated or in-depth backstory, but I do want like a really solid like
hook,
almost like aesthetic or something. Like with that paladin, I'm like, he's a gunslinger, bound by truth and honesty, kind of this, he's a good guy gunslinger, very like, I don't know, almost makes me think Wyatt Earp or something like that. That was kind of what that was like inspired by. Not that Wyatt Earp was not that Wyatt Earp was probably like actually the best guy in all of history. There's maybe a better example, but or like Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers is maybe a better example.
He's a good guy.
He does kill everybody, but there are bad people.
But they're bad people. You killed a lot of people.
That D&D character did kill a lot of people, but he killed the bad people too. So yeah, I don't know, up for debate. But he had a strong aesthetic. I can give you that little tidbit, and you can see that character in your mind. Mm-hmm. Recently, in our Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign, I played like a young detective. It was a rogue, and he was a young kind of maybe not detective, but like PI, something like that. And so it was kind of a young, scrawny Sherlock Holmesy character. So he had he's super intelligent and could piece together all kinds of mysteries, but still had a little bit of like the finding himself that you have in youth. So like in that character I could really see. So it's like I pick like a really strong vibe, a really strong theme or aesthetic, and I give it some strong like hooks to media or like things that other people when I say Sherlock Holmes or when I say Wyatt Earp, like that gives people a picture in their head, and then all the other stuff I kind of figure out in game.
Yep, that's what I try to do. I try to my best character backstory was I think I'm a Boy Scout, and then that's how we started the game.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff happened from that. But also you stayed true to that theme as well. Like, it's not like you abandoned it. You stayed true to him being a Boy Scout. Like, he was constantly like getting badges and, you know, or doing things to earn a badge kind of thing, but then also like found other hooks to play into and you know, change during the campaign.
That's something that's really easy with like playing adolescent characters, is that it's a lot easier to justify like them changing really fast on something, or like adopting something that's a little interesting, or doing something dumb even.
Yeah, like it only could be a kid that like sees a book tied to the god of death and is like, well, I want to check it out. You know? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Or like with my gunslinger, the way that he changed was he was a paladin class, and that was why he was bound by like truth and honor and stuff. So he was a paladin to begin with, but he became even more so a paladin as the campaign went on and really leaned into that.
At one point you even gave up the gun and went straight for sword.
Yep, he gave up the gun because his brother caught up with him, and he had to shoot his brother. It was a very Old West standoff moment. And so after he shot his brother, he gave up the way of the gunslinger and really went full paladin with the sword. You know, still had all the, you know,
I know a little insight into that.
Traits,
I was fully 100% planning on you dying there. In my head, the best case scenario for right there was you dying, and then you rolled like a fucking crazy person. So I was like, all right.
Yeah, we had talked about. Before the campaign started, I said I wanted to play a gunslinger, and I said something that is important to me about a gunslinger is like the duel. You know, that if you come across someone else that's a gunslinger, you have that standoff moment where you're waiting for them to draw, you know, and you try to draw quicker.
Yeah, we made the dueling rule where
so we like made a little rule set for it where it's like, okay, it's this kind of roll followed by this kind of roll followed by this, and it's like best 2 out of 3 of those 3 rolls wins the duel, and the other person like is insta killed. Like, it was like no matter how the duel goes, like it's not just damage, it's like that person dies, right? And so it was like a best 2 out of 3 rolls, different kind of rolls. It was like, you know, something about keeping your cool and then drawing fast and then aiming true was kind of how it went, right? Mm-hmm. And I won all 3 rolls, I believe. And there was like kind of a system where it's like if you win the first roll, it gives you advantage on the second.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, you killed him the second roll because you won the best 2 out of 3. Absolutely obliterated him.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So yeah, it's like we had established something, played it out. But yeah, I honestly didn't know either. I figured, you know, when I left you that when my brother caught up.
I love that note that I wrote. Yeah. I wonder if I could find it.
on his body there was a note about things that he had wanted to say to his brother that he never did, and so that was kind of the moment where it's like, you know,
I was sitting there like writing it, and I was like, I'm such a little shithead for this.
Dude, it was horrible. It was like basically like the story was like two brothers, kind of gunslinger brothers, that just their ways of thinking were so
they're very different
that like that they just could never really reconcile.
Dude, I found it already.
Oh, nice. Mine was about, you know, truth and honor, and he was a kind of a bandit and, you know, was willing to take advantage of people, and so we just never saw eye to eye, and we knew that no matter how much we wanted to have a good relationship with the other brother, that when we finally did meet again, it probably would end that way, and it did.
Yep, this letter is it's just as sad as I remember.
Dude, we need like a Patreon or Discord or something like... Subscribe to the Patreon, you can see the letter or something like that.
You can see the letter that made Keegan throw away a gun in D&D.
Yeah, like permanently change my character. Yeah, we talked about guns last episode too.
We did.
Yeah, I gave up the ability to have a cool gunslinger because he did a horrible thing. And so his like repentance was he gave it up. He gave up the ways of a gunslinger.
That was a fun campaign.
It was. And I think that's interesting. You know, talking about homebrewing some rules when you come up with a certain character, things like that to really fit it. I have another good question here.
Okay.
That I think we've probably both had as DMs and probably both handled it differently at different times. I know that things like this have happened to me multiple times. This comes from user Admiral Dandy. Thank you, Admiral Dandy.
I love you, Admiral
He asked... Players have correctly guessed that an NPC is a dragon in disguise. Should I just roll with it or throw them a curveball?
Dude,
running a 9th level heist adventure for my players, and they met an NPC at a party last week and absolutely grilled him on his backstory, leading them to correctly conclude that he is a dragon in disguise. Admittedly, I was a little bit heavy-handed with it, but I was happy they were intrigued by this mysterious fellow. Despite rolling well on his deception checks and his story lining up well, it was all too much. That being said, should I just roll with it? Should I throw them a curveball? What would you do in this situation? What would be the most interesting? They're definitely going to have an encounter with them one way or the other. Parts of me really wants to just be right, or have them just be right, but the other part of me thinks it'd be very funny if he turns out to just be some dude instead. I have some thoughts about this, but I want to hear from you, Jake.
It like a big reveal like that, them guessing it, I feel like it is either like you gave too much information away, or they actually just like took all of the requisite information that you've given them, the little hints that you've dropped, and took off with it. Just figured it out right there.
Yeah.
So I can see
he said he was self-admittedly a little heavy-handed with it.
I can see how that
probably a little bit of both.
I can see how that would feel bad as a DM, being like, oh, they figured out my cool twist like way before I could have even thrown it in their way. But that's also really cool that you were able to like drop hints and then figure it out. So I think,
and it shows that your players are engaged,
and
they're paying attention.
I think in that scenario, I would roll with it. That he's a dragon, and then when it comes out, everyone at the table is going to be like, I knew it, and it'll feel good for them. They'll feel fantastic about that they were able to guess that this is a dragon.
Yeah, I think my process for that is like when your players guess like a plot twist or something, there is like an instant desire as a DM to like switch it up and to change it, right? So that because you want it to be a surprise. But I think that is like that's like a fear response, right? Yeah. That's like you being worried that like your story wasn't good.
I think it's a cheap way out.
Right. So it's like you being worried that your story wasn't good or wasn't well written enough so that they've guessed it, and so you're going to change it. But I think there's a couple reasons why that's not true, right? I think one is if your players guessed a plot twist because of the information that you've given them, that means that your story made sense, right? It was logical. Like they were able to follow pieces of evidence and draw a conclusion from that was accurate to what you had written. And I think that's a good sign. I think that means that you are making, that your plot twist was foreshadowed well and that there was hints towards that because it makes sense, right? And so, your players might say, and I think the best thing you can do is just poker face, right? Don't react. And then stick to your guns and reveal that. And just like you said, Jake, like they're going to think it's cool regardless. Like, yeah, you're going to have some players that are like, I knew it the whole time, I guessed that. You're going to have other players that were like, oh my God, I didn't believe you. I didn't think you actually figured it out. Like, everybody's going to find it cool regardless. Like, it does not, them having theories that that's true, or even just outright fully understanding that, a plot twist and fully guessing it, like, doesn't make it not cool.
No,
right?
I don't think by any means it lessens the experience that someone knew beforehand.
Right. And so your players are still going to be surprised to some extent or impressed or just, they're going to have that reaction that you're looking for. But it's also going to build trust, right? Like they're going to trust that in that moment, like, oh, like even though, we guessed months ago. Yeah, like the DM stuck to his guns. He still kind of played it through, because if you get scared by them guessing something and you try to switch it up last moment and you create a different plot twist or whatever, one, it's not going to feel logical. It's not going to feel well written or well foreshadowed because it's not, because you switched it up last second.
Yep. And
your players might feel that. And it's going to feel, one, they're bummed because they had a theory that was wrong now, right? So I think I think them being surprised is not going to outweigh the disappointment of like, damn, like I really thought I had it figured out. Like I thought I was paying attention. And so that
especially those players that are super invested, and the person that did figure it out,
or like they're taking notes.
If they're taking notes and they eventually like figure it out before you release it. If you change it after the fact, that person might not be so invested afterwards.
Right, because there was no value in it, right? It didn't amount to anything, right? And so it feels, it's a little disingenuous, and I don't think the surprise of a completely unpredicted or unseen plot twist is worth a story that is kind of inauthentic because you changed it last moment, right? And not not logical. It's not going to follow the foreshadowing and hints that you had set up before.
Yeah. I guess
if you drop hints that he's a dragon and then he's not anything, it's like, then why did you say all that stuff before? You can't take it back.
I guess in a opposite situation, would you think that let's say this person is hiding as a lich or something, and we're all you're dropping the hints, and we're all like, this guy. Someone's like, this guy's a dragon, and someone's like, this guy's something else. If in your head he was a lich, when you go to reveal it, do you stick that he's a lich, or do you pick something that another player guessed?
That's interesting. I will say,
because to
that point,
that's kind of following the rule that it's in the player's favor. You're changing something, but it's in the player's favor, not against the players.
Yeah, I will say that. I have absolutely done that as a DM. I have had a guy that was maybe this guy said. I've had an NPC that was just a dude, right? But if some player for some reason is I think it's a dragon in disguise, that is absolutely the new truth. And that guy's a dragon in disguise, and I'm going to write around it and add things in, and next time they encounter him, I'm going to give hints about him being a dragon, and then it's going to be revealed, and that player will be like, I was right, even if it wasn't true beforehand, because that scenario is that guy went from being a regular average NPC to being a dragon in disguise. So that's just more interesting, right? Yeah. They improved my story and made something more interesting by guessing something that wasn't correct at the time. But now, not only do I get to make the story more interesting, but I get to reward that player by being like, yeah, you were right the whole time. I knew it the whole time. It's so I definitely have done that. When players try to guess something and it's actually really interesting or cool, I'm like, yep, it's true now.
Yeah, so basically, if it's to save your own feelings, don't do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't try to yeah, I think if it's in service of the players, I think and this broadens out to a lot of DM experiences and tabletop RPG advice I would give is if it's in service of the players, go for it. If it's in service of your precious world building or your lore that you've spent hours pondering over, probably not. Just let it go.
Yeah, it'll be less if the entire goal for it is everyone to have fun, and if you're super invested in this little bit that you've written, then maybe you should go take your hand at go write a novel or something. But if you're invested in the players and their enjoyment, if they're guess it, then they're cool. Make them feel good.
Exactly. And then when we've said that before, right, about you should go write a book, and it's and I'll keep saying it because it rings so true. It's this is a collaborative storytelling game, and in a moment where the players guess something and that becomes true, regardless if it was before. Maybe it wasn't true before and you made it true, or it was the true the whole time and you stuck with that. Then that is collaborative, right? But if you change the story because you don't want them to guess it, that's a completely selfish change only in your interest, right? You just didn't want them to guess it, and you wanted control of that world building, and so you switched it around, right? That was just your own fear and your own, maybe paranoia, and so you switched it. So it's
and at that point, if they figured out the twist that you make, if you change the twist, it is pretty cheap. And
yeah,
at least as a DM for me, if I couldn't do that because I worked hard to obviously set up hints for it, so when it gets to the point where they have kind of figured it out and I go to reveal it and I change it, that's I feel like that sucks for me also, because I spent all the time working it was one thing and then changed it to another thing.
True. Yeah, so I would just say, if you have a choice between doing something collaboratively with your players to affect the story and doing something solely as a DM, on your own, trying to establish some sort of world building or lore, always choose the collaboration. Always lean into your players, because that's going to provide, like you said, the most fun and interesting story, which is why we're there. We're there to have fun, and we're there to tell cool stories.
Yeah.
And being collaborative with your players always serves both of those things.
Yeah, and I think this is a generational thing too, because from the sounds of it, like an older generation of players probably doesn't. I don't think they feel the same way that we feel about a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think in general, the way we talk about tabletop RPGs is different because, it used to be so crunchy. It used to be like,
it was all about the board game before.
Yeah, the board game and the system and the rules were like very much the focus in like old school tabletop RPGs.
Yeah.
When my dad was playing and his friends, like, they were telling cool stories to a degree, but they were not. It was about the game, right? They were delving in dungeons, they were dodging traps, they were fighting enemies, and like, a story might have been told about, going to defeat an ancient necromancer. But I think in our generation of tabletop RPGs, especially because of things like Critical Role or Dimension 20 or, these like bigger shows, it's like you're watching for a story. You want to see how the characters grow and change. You want to see, all those things, not just like, them doing dungeon crawls, right? Like,
yeah, because that's lame. If I was watching a D&D podcast and they're just the entire time was just walk into this room and I'm going to ask the wizard if he's got anything for me. Oh, he does? Okay, I'm going to go find the goblin hideout that he told me about, and I'm going to fight the goblins.
Yeah. Like that, like that role play and stuff, I think was more spaced out as well too. Like, people's like actions in combat and stuff, like maybe when they talk to the bartender, they have a voice for their character, right? But like, yeah, in other things, like, I don't know how often people were talking to each other as their PCs, delving into their backstories, things like that. I think that, and maybe this is something we should have my dad back on again to talk about, but I think a lot of that is newer generation tabletop RPGs. And so now when we're playing, like, we are so interested in the story, and, everything we do is in service to like the narrative and telling a cool story with our friends, and, using touchstones from media that we love, to kind of get that point across.
Well, and I've noticed that when we've played with Joe in the past, that he is as a DM, and I don't. It's got to be something that's just engraved in his brain. But he is prone to like interrupt us when we're like trying to RP something. And I'm certain that you're right, that it is just that he's not used to players wanting to do that all the time.
Yeah, like it's not like he's like, and it's not like out of rudeness or anything. Of course, like, we still had a great time. It's just like, it's like he's so used to kind of pushing his players along, because narratively they don't do it, right? It's like they just, oh yeah, we go to this place. And then he has to instantly be like, okay, so when you go to it becomes the DM's job to describe this new place, and then they leave right from there to the dungeon. And then he has to describe the dungeon and the traps and all these things. It's like, it puts so much work on the DM. Whereas like for us, we might describe, going to this place, and then the players are talking to each other, and then they have this, harebrained, crazy idea, and, or we're doing some bit, the players are joking, the player characters are joking around with each other and talking to each other. It's like, and then me as the DM, like I give you guys all this space to breathe and do those things, and it gives me time to like prep, we
might have
Joe isn't used to that.
I walk into town and I see a little kid there, and the little kid comes up to me and he says, "Is my dad okay?" And I go, "Son, your dad passed away. This is his sword. He told me to tell you." You remember that?
That did happen.
He just took over. That was so it was just like it's so funny. It was
just like a random encounter. I was like, oh, like maybe they'll find like a cart that's been destroyed by like these monsters that have been plaguing this city. And so it's like it was a very real way for you guys to see like, this person driving this cart was killed by these monsters, and the cart was ransacked and destroyed. And then when they get to, then you guys get to the town, and one of my players is like, yeah, his son is there, and he asks about his dad, and so I give him his sword. I'm like, your father was brave.
The little kid comes up to me and he says, "Where's my dad? Did you guys find my dad?"
Yeah, he just totally took control in that moment, and it was awesome. It was so funny.
It's so cool
because it's like, it's not something I thought of as a DM. Like, I wasn't gonna have his son be there, and whatever. But it was such a funny moment, and he just totally took control of it, and it was awesome. I love things like that. And so, it's like, that's a good example of like, we were just doing something because it was funny, and it was interesting, and also like added to the kind of story of it, the narrative. It kind of brought it all together. Whereas like that stuff didn't exist in old tabletop RPGs. And so Joe, my dad, is so used to, constantly having to give his players these like prompts of like, okay, so you open the door, and there's a trap, and so you have to dodge. It's like everything is like this kind of sequential. Mm-hmm. It all gets like plays into like the roles.
It feels
and, like,
more like a board game.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Where it's like we have so much in our games. We have so much room for role play and things like that. Because that's how we enjoy it. But yeah, I do think there's like definitely a generational shift.
I think for the better, to be fair.
I think, I don't know. I mean, every table is different, right? Some people might really want that like very gamified version of tabletop RPGs where, the rules are complicated, and, the moves, there's a lot of things to do, and you got to calculate your distances and your, things like that. And you keep track of your components for your spells. Like, some people like that. I don't. I just don't care to do it because that's not fun. Right? What's fun for me is the story.
I agree.
But yeah, like there's definitely some players will enjoy that, but like for our table, that really narrative focused type of game works really well.
Yeah,
we should have Joe on again. We should talk about the generational shifts. The difference between his generation of tabletop RPGs and mine.
Yeah, especially knowing he's DM'd for both his generation.
Yeah, because he's still DMing. He was DMing in the 80s, and he's DMing now. So he has knows better than anybody how it's different or how it's changed.
He's just a fountain of knowledge.
He is definitely that. Talking about rules and how you handle them, I have another question for you, Jake.
Alrighty.
User Specialist String 53
I like that.
Asks, scouting, do your players do it? How do you handle it? I'm in the process of writing a guide to scouting. Right now, it's mostly focused around player options, broken down into stealth, infiltration, and magical sensors. Meanwhile, I wanted to ask about everyone's experience with scouting and how they handle it as DMs. I've rarely been in a party where scouting ahead was common, and in the game I'm currently playing, I'm playing a druid that does a lot of scouting, usually Pass Without Trace plus Spider Shape. It seems to me that scouting should be a high priority for players because being able to plan a tactic for a group of enemies and hopefully get a surprise round makes combat a lot easier. I think the main reasons I've seen that players do not scout are splitting the parties often dangerous and unfun. On the DM side, I don't often think about what monsters are doing when the players aren't around if it's like a dungeon. Like, if the players get to spectate for a bit, now I have to think, are these sentient enemies talking to each other? What about? Or what is the daily routine for this monster? Is it just pacing back and forth in this room? In searching this forum, I've seen a number of posts that are essentially, my players are scouting, how do I stop them? Things like complaining about overuse of familiars for scouting, and many of the comments will be things like, have a bird of prey attack the familiar. I think a better approach might be to ask, how can I make scouting more fun for everyone? It's a good question, and a well-written question.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to it. It's good. Fuck. We don't do a ton of scouting normally.
And I think this guy hit the nail on the head for why. Is splitting the party is dangerous, and it's not fun. Because if that one player that's like stealthing to scout ahead gets caught, their stealth roll's bad, now that player's in a lot of trouble and could die, lose their character or something. Gosh. Also, I think it's not fun to narrate someone scouting for an extended period of time while everyone else is like waiting behind. It's just not everyone's included in that.
A D&D system, I think, is not made for something like that. But I'm thinking at like a Monster of the Week, there are lots of reasons to go scout something in Monster of the Week. To send one person off But something like D&D, where like the power balance is kind of shifted in a way where if a player is missing from the party, that they're basically sitting duck and waiting to die. It's hard to like justify it, as I guess is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's like
D&D.
too dangerous.
But if I was playing Monster of the Week, I would for sure be like, okay, I'm gonna go check out the arcade, and you guys should go look at this, and we'll come back later, and then let's say like the person scouting the arcade got kidnapped, like that gives you another cool thing that could happen. Because the whole thing is really narrative and easy to run and not...
Right, and that game, yeah, like splitting the party is not as big of a deal in that game because it is like a mystery, and so like splitting up and looking for clues is like a reasonable thing because it's kind of... in that game,
happens
it's boring
in every episode of Scooby-Doo.
Exactly. In that game, it's boring if everyone has to go to the arcade, and then everyone has to go to the police station, and then everyone has to go to the library. It's like... It just takes time. So it's very easy to be like, okay, at the arcade, you find this. And at the police station, you find this. At the library, you find this. All right, great. Reconvene and go hunt the monster, you know?
Mm-hmm. One person got kidnapped by the monster. Now we have to find information on that. And it's basically a whole new mystery. Meanwhile, the person that got kidnapped by the monster, what do you see? You see this, this, and this. And then
you're in its nest, and it has horrible eggs. And, it's like, just more information, more cool stuff. Right. But in D&D... If you go to scout the goblin camp and they see you, they shoot you with bows and you die.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you could do more. Maybe the goblins tie him up and they or whatever. But regardless, it's like still this
combat
like very
comes
dangerous.
in and you're like, oh,
you're down a player.
You're roll for initiative. You can't do anything. You're tied up. Sorry.
Yeah, you have to make a strength check to try to escape the bonds, or you got to try to make this check to get out of the cage, or however it is. It's like, it's just not fun. It's not enjoyable for like. The mechanical advantage is there, right? Like you said, where like they might get a surprise round, right?
Yeah,
things like that. So like we've
set
an
up
advantage to doing
it, so we get a surprise round.
Right, there are advantages to it, but the danger of it, and the fact that
the cons outweigh the pros
involve all
in
the
that
players.
Situation.
I think so.
And
I think
that's why
like we don't do a lot of scouting.
Situations, the cons outweigh the pros. Now. Druid characters we have sent in a number of times as like mice or birds or something to like, try to see if you can't hear anything out, and that's like a very brief usually a very brief scene, like, they're moving around, and while you're sitting around you overhear this and that. I mean, that's about like the extent that we've really gotten from it.
Yeah. So I guess this person ends the post with, how can I make scouting more fun for everyone? Do you have any thoughts to that?
Yeah. Come back to me on that. You give your 2 cents.
Okay.
I'm gonna ponder.
I think if your players, like our group, don't enjoy scouting because of the aforementioned danger and unfunness of it, then don't worry about it, right? Then don't, there doesn't have to be some incredible information that someone gleans from scouting, right? They might just walk up and be like, yeah, the goblins are just chilling in camp, and they can all stealth if they want to do a surprise attack, and, and ambush the goblins, and you can still get your surprise round, right? So kind of like we were saying before, in the interest of your players and catering to your players, then that's fine. But if you have a group of players where maybe one person in particular is really about scouting, maybe they make a character that like is built to scout things out and return to his group, then clearly you're going to need to involve it more. So what I would do in that instance is almost the exact opposite. Give them something interesting that they learn. Give them maybe a piece of lore that you've been holding on to that like you haven't found a good place to drop in yet. It's like, you see the goblins are worshiping a statue of this god, and clearly that must mean that this god is somehow related to these goblin factions or something, right? Give them something not necessarily like a mechanical advantage or something, but like give them something interesting. That like makes scouting feel good, like, like now we know this thing that we didn't know before, and then they can return to their group and and then they all go and can ambush them or get their surprise round if they want, things like that. But I wouldn't make it probably as dangerous, right? Unless they roll really bad on like a stealth roll. And then maybe even then, like if they roll really bad on a stealth roll, like maybe they just realize. Maybe it's like as you get closer to the camp, like you realize, on this, unsteady ground, and covered in sticks and dry brush, how much noise you're making, and you don't think you'll be able to get close enough without getting found. And so you've basically stopped them, and they can just go back to their group. But it's not like this whole thing where it's like, oh, now this one player's on their own and everybody else has to try to come in, and they can still try for an ambush when the whole group gets there together. If they, and you can say the same thing. If they fail their stealth rolls, then it's like, that sticks and dry brush that I was talking about makes so much noise, and the goblins are alerted to your presence. Roll for initiative. So it's like, they don't get that surprise round, but like you're not put in this awkward position where you're like, oh man, this one player's bound and gagged, and so action economy's thrown off, and this fight against goblins is actually gonna be really hard for the remaining players.
Yeah, I'm really struggling with how to make it interesting. Because, the best case scenario, you get like a little bit of information, maybe like a location for something that you didn't know before. That could be something. Is like maybe they talk about like a legend or a treasure or something that they heard about when scouting, and your party gets like an extra piece of information on something else, something unrelated. But as far as like related things, position of enemies is sometimes nice. Depending on how like crunchy you get or like your style of combat, you could do like a stealth operation where you kill or take out like one at a time in like Assassin's Creed ass ways, but
yeah.
But I don't.
But then again, like that falls into the like that's not fun for other players,
Yeah,
I don't want to sit there while somebody does like a scouting mission for 20 minutes,
Yeah, it's really
even
hard.
If it's, yeah.
I don't know. I'm really fucking stumped on this one.
Yeah,
I think the first thing I said, the best case is that like give them something unrelated that could be interesting for them to go look at later. Be like, there's a cave 15 miles south, and fucking Doug over here was telling me that there is some little lizard in there that was hoarding some gold or something, and then turn that into something.
Yeah. Yeah, like give them something interesting. Yeah, like the guards are talking to each other. I always like that, and that kind of goes into this guy talking about like what do the monsters do, or what is happening when the players aren't there. It's like monsters do the things that players do when they're in camp. They eat, they sleep, they're preparing for whatever their goal is. They talk, like you don't have to make it crazy complicated. They might just be shooting the shit, like around a campfire, because that's what players do when they're around a campfire. If the monsters are camped out there because they're preparing to attack a city, or something the next day, then it's like, maybe they're sharpening weapons and oiling armor and, whatever. It's like, like those things I think can be the logical answers and still make sense. Like, I don't think your players need a ton from you as a DM to like really describe the, innermost personal life of these orcs or goblins or whatever.
Yeah. When you get into stuff like that, then you're just getting into things that really doesn't matter, and it feels like you're kind of just filling space.
Yeah, exactly. So I would just keep it brief but interesting. Give them a small piece of information quickly so that they can get back to their party, make a plan, and go forward with it. Because, honestly, like in D&D, there's so many times where like players are like planning, right? And for a lot of reasons, it's unnecessary because as a DM, you've already balanced the encounter. When you made a camp of goblins, you've already picked the number of goblins that you think will be challenging for your players or appropriate, right? Or if your players have, a certain utility, you've already planned for that being in the fight, right? So you've already balanced the encounter. So like if they get a slight mechanical advantage by some sort of plan that they've created, great. But if not, it's already a balanced encounter. And so I think it's just probably, the players planning. If it's fun for them, if it's something they enjoy, creating this complicated plan to fight something, that's fine. Let them do it. But often, like, as a DM, players are, like, planning, and they'll have one plan, and in my head, I'm like, yeah, like, that'll work. And they'll be like, no, that'll never work. Like, we have to do something else. And I'm like, now I gotta sit here for 20 more minutes while you guys continue to plan when both plans would have worked, And then they come up with another plan. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, that'll also work. Like, it just doesn't matter, like...
Yeah. Any plan you come up with is generally good enough to function.
Yeah,
actually,
like
I'm not going to say that.
To it.
If you come up with a stupid ass plan and I'm DMing, I'm fucking you over so goddamn bad.
Yeah, like if you're sneaking into a dragon's lair and you're like, we're gonna go in there all playing instruments and it will confuse him so much that he won't know. It's like clearly, you're getting blowtorched by a dragon.
Yeah.
But it's if you create any plan that has like a level of logic and thought to it, like I'm gonna reward that. Like I'm gonna my job is not to fucking stonewall you every time you try to engage in an encounter. Like, you're gonna kill the goblins, you're gonna clear the camp, you're gonna get the loot, and you're gonna move on. Like, I don't really care if you scout it out and sneak attack, or if you run in there, shouting fireball and kill the goblins. Like, it truly doesn't matter to me as a DM. I don't care either way. We're gonna make it fun either way you do it, and that's how it goes.
Yeah. I don't think there's a excellent way of doing that.
Yeah, I think you just pay, just like I said, cater to your players. If they like scouting and if it's fun, try to make it interesting. Try to do it, try to keep it quick and so that you're not excluding the players that aren't scouting. And
I think make it pretty snappy is probably the best thing for it.
Quick and interesting, I think, is the best way you could approach that.
Give
and if your players aren't interested in scouting, then don't worry about it.
Yeah, if they aren't interested in scouting, your job is way easier. Congratulations.
Yeah, don't like punish them and be like, oh, now they'll never find out this information because they did not scout. It's like, don't do that. That's ridiculous. Like, just make that information available elsewhere. Or when they kill all the goblins, then they loot one of the goblins and he has a scrawled, piece of paper where he's written down prayers to this god, and now you realize that this god is part of this, has something to do with these goblin factions. Like, you can just give those answers in other ways that, like, they didn't have to do some sort of stealth mission to hear the goblins talking to each other. It doesn't matter. You can figure out how to give that information another way. So don't punish them if you have a party that's not interested in scouting, and if you do, then quick and interesting.
You know what I think? A party that is interested in scouting is not interested in what we tend to do, and that is torture.
The amount of time that my party has taken one goblin hostage for information, far too many.
So if you'll know very soon if you're going to have a party that's more interested in torture or more interested in scouting. They both have very similar outcomes, but either way it'll be pretty funny.
That is an interesting question in itself, because, like, of course it's beneficial to capture an enemy and get information out of them, right? Like, I mean, we've seen it in all of, like, human history as well as, fantasy. It's like, of course it makes sense. But, like, as a DM, like, what are you supposed to do? Because it's not like no levels of intimidation checks or persuasion checks really matter. It's like, this goblin is not going to, like, die, before he tells them that, his bugbear leader is planning to attack the city. Like, he's a fucking goblin.
He's gonna say, Boris, he's planning on attacking the city and they're in this area. And, they're gonna spill all the beans.
Yeah, they're gonna spill their guts, and then they're probably gonna, maybe you let them go, or I feel like most of the time,
and then the party adopts the goblin, and
sometimes that happens.
I tried to the last time, because he had a funny little accent, and then everyone else was like, we're gonna fucking blow his brains out.
I specifically remember you guys captured that goblin, you tied him up, and then you put hot rocks in his mouth.
We did put a hot rock in his mouth, yeah.
You had, like, fire.
Don't say you got... No, I guess you really weren't involved in that one. You were a player in that, though.
Bystander effect. I watched in horror and couldn't properly react as you guys put hot rocks in the goblin's mouth to make him talk.
Pretty good way of making it talk.
Fair enough. And without Hot Rocks involved, I will spill my guts about all of our information, which is we would love for you to leave a comment below.
God damn it.
You can also find our email in the description, and we would love to hear from you in the email. If you have a funny, scary, bad, good, any kind of tabletop RPG story, we would love to read it and react to it and give you our thoughts on it. If you need some advice in your tabletop RPG, we would love to give some advice for something you're trying to figure out how to rule or how to do. Rate 5 stars on Spotify. It's super important for us to get this podcast out there. Tell your friends if they love tabletop RPGs. Word of mouth is super important at this stage. We're just trying to grow it. We're just here because we love it. We love talking about tabletop RPGs, and we're best buddies, and we like to find some time in the week to just sit and talk. But I would love if our advice got out there to more people, and they got to engage in tabletop RPGs with us and listen along with us. So
I totally agree with that.
Thank you so much for listening, and we really value you guys' time. So in interest of that, we'll wrap up. And I've been Keegan. This is my best buddy, Jake. And we are the Gelatinous Dudes. Goodbye!
Bye!